to another episode of Cavanaugh's Corner. As always, I'm Andrew Cavanaugh. I want to say thank you for coming back to the channel. Today I have definitely a favorite of mine. This is a movie that I've loved ever since it came out. I remember seeing this movie for the first time when I was a kid, and it's an outstanding masterwork of a film. It's another one of those rare films that I honestly couldn't think of anything bad to say about it. It's Apollo 13. This is the new 4K Ultra HD transfer of the movie, and I have to say, Houston, I do not have a problem with this movie. This is just an outstanding release from Universal. Pretty much, I mean, it's a perfect 4K transfer. This movie is very near and dear to my heart for a lot of reasons. When this movie came out when I was a kid, I was very much into space and astronaut stuff, and this movie came out right when I was into that kind of thing, and I'll never forget it. I still tear up in the closing scenes of the film. If you haven't seen Apollo 13 and you happen to live under a rock, Apollo 13 is the true story of three astronauts. Their names, I should say, are Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Haise, who are played by Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, and Bill Paxton in this. They are on a routine, not routine, but they're on a mission to land on the moon, and a oxygen tank in their spacecraft explodes, basically mid-flight, and their lives are basically in jeopardy. And the movie is basically about their struggle to get home. Now, as you all know, true stories can be extremely dramatic. This movie is pretty much, I mean, the drama in this film is their situation. However, of course, liberties were taken, and they added on a lot of extra drama to the film that wasn't really there during the actual events, but it makes for a damn good movie. And another great performance in this movie is Ed Harris. Ed Harris in this film everybody in this movie is just a fucking powerhouse. I mean, everybody in this movie is just, it's a rare movie where you get perfect performances from pretty much all your lead actors. And Ron Howard's direction in this is pretty much flawless. I mean, there's really not anything bad I can say about this movie, as I said earlier. It's one of those rare, pitch-perfect films from beginning to end. And honestly, this 4K release is something that really I have to talk about. The movie itself seems extremely crisp from beginning to end. The detail that they've gotten out of this 4K version is just outstanding. And I've seen this movie many, many times. I owned it on VHS, I owned it on DVD. I actually own two different versions of it on DVD. I have the IMAX version of it on DVD, which is a very strange version of the film. They changed the aspect ratio, and they cut a few scenes out. It's a really weird, version of the movie, but it's okay. I also, owned it on Blu-ray twice. I bought the original release of it on Blu-ray, and then they re-released it, I want to say, 2-3 years ago on Blu-ray. And now I own it again in 4K. So it's yet another one of these movies where I've rebought it more times than God knows at this point. But I will say, this is, yet again, the best version of this movie that I've ever seen. I was skeptical, because the last Blu-ray release they had was a total remaster of the film, and the picture of it, the picture in that release was just amazing, and it was basically the best it's ever been. Well, then they came out with this version, and my God, you can't get any better than this. This is a masterful, masterful 4K release from Universal, and I have to say, it's the first time I've watched a 4K movie where the scene I had seen probably 20, 30 times, okay? and I saw it for the first time on this 4K disc all over again. It is really like watching the movie for the first time all over again. Much like how I told you about the re-release on 4K of Blade Runner, how that version on 4K is really just so crystal clear, the colors are so vibrant that it's pretty much like seeing it again for the first time. This is pretty much the ultimate definition of that. A great example of that is the HDR adds a whole other range of colors to the film. For instance, there's a scene early on in the film where Tom Hanks is speaking to his son, the character's son, not his actual son, but Tom Hanks is speaking to his son in the film, and it's early morning, and they're sitting at the son's little coffee table, and they're playing with little miniature toys of the various spacecraft that NASA was using during the Apollo missions. And it almost made me it made me tear up, honestly, because it was so beautiful, and I've never seen it look like this. There's sunlight coming in through a window, and it's shining on half of their faces during the scene, and it's a beautifully perfect shade of orange. And it's stunning. It is a stunning transfer. The levels that you get of shadows, the black levels, the contrast throughout the entire film is very different from any other release of this movie, and it's something I'm going to mention again in a minute. But the entire film, the whole color palette, seems a little bit warmer in certain parts, and I really like that. You really get a handle of what the director of photography and what Ron Howard was originally going for when they shot this movie. And it's great that we finally have the technology now in our homes to really view the movie the way that it was supposed to be seen. The movie also has a new DTS-X master audio soundtrack, and I've got to say, it is unbelievable. The sound effects throughout the movie, when they're in space, when they're on the ground, just dialogue is outstanding. It is perfectly clear at all times. There's not a lot of directional audio in this. They really didn't fool around with that, but it's mainly used for atmospheric stuff, which is a great strength of DTS-X and Dolby Atmos, I should say. There's no Dolby Atmos at this one, it's just DTS-X. Universal seems to favor DTS-X on their 4K discs, but it is so crystal clear, it's amazing. The blast-off scene, in particular, will probably explode windows if played at the right frequency. It is scary loud, but I will tell you, it is like nothing I've experienced. The blast-off sequence is just so phenomenal. I absolutely loved that scene with that new soundtrack. It is fantastic. You also really get the room shaking with that subwoofer, I'll tell you. Oh my God, there's some really low lows in this movie. It's awesome. Something else I want to mention too is that there's really no special features. There's no new special features on this release. All the special features are on the regular Blu-ray disc, and that regular Blu-ray disc is just pretty much the same release that was out a few years ago. I didn't really see any differences there. But it's still nice to have that disc just in case. I'm glad they didn't just not release it with that disc. It's nice they give you both. And a digital copy, which is also really nice. But one thing I wanted to mention, and it's something that's probably going to be a little controversial with this release, but as I mentioned earlier, the HDR in this movie really changes the color palette of the film. Even the consoles, when they go to scenes that are taking place in the mission control, the consoles are a different shade of green. And I'm not kidding. Like, there's colors that are seen in this version that are completely different than any other version of the film. It's really cool to see. Even the lights in the command module and the LEM in the movie are completely different. The shades of the lights change and they flicker. It's really wild to see. It's a really cool thing. If you've seen this movie a few times, you'll notice the differentials right away. It's pretty cool. But one thing I want to mention is that the movie is darker. And, well, what do I mean by that? But the whole movie has seemingly dropped the shade in terms of darkness. And that's purposeful. And I'm going to explain to you why I think that's purposeful. I don't know this for certain yet. I'm going to do a little research, and if it comes up that it's true, I'll update the video. But for now, this is just my speculation, is that Dean Cundy is the director of photography for this film. I actually mentioned Dean a while back when I reviewed the collector's edition of Roadhouse, because he also was the director of photography for that. He did Jurassic Park. He's done some really great movies, okay? But he was the director of photography for this movie. And Dean is also known as the Dean of Darkness. He really likes playing with shadows in his films. He loves using darkness. And this movie is, in essence, a fairly dark movie. I mean, most of it does take place in outer space. And there's nothing darker than outer space. It's literally pure black with the little stars here and there. And other releases of the film, I will say, did not look as dark as this one. And I think the explanation is the fact that the new color palette of this release and the overall resolution of 4K can handle blacker blacks, meaning that this disc is obviously going to have a greater sense of contrast than any other disc that's been released before, for this movie, I should say. And you can see it. Even in the opening scenes where Jim Lovell is driving to the house in the Stingray, it is seemingly darker. Now, I have no problem with that for this film because this disc handles that contrast really well. And I have to commend Universal on keeping that contrast basically perfect throughout the film. There is some grain in this release, but as I mentioned earlier, in a movie that was shot on film like this was, you're going to get film grain. It's natural. They've done a good job on lightening it in certain parts, but certain scenes that have a lot of special effects, you're going to see that grain. But you cannot take the grain out of the entire film. Otherwise, you lose the detail. And I'm glad they did not do that in this film. I'm really glad that a lot of studios now are learning their lesson when it comes to film grain, and they're keeping it in the film. For this release of Apollo 13, this is an absolutely spectacular release of the film. I loved it. It is a masterwork of filmmaking, storytelling, acting. Everything about this movie is already outstanding. And this is the best way to watch it. There is nothing like this out there right now. I loved Apollo 13 on 4K. It blew me away. For a film that I grew up with, watching this was like watching it for the first time all over again. And I teared up just like I do every single time I watch this movie, especially now with this one. But again, if you have a 4K TV, if you have a surround sound system, please go and pick up Apollo 13 on 4K. This is an awesome, awesome release, and I cannot wait to share this with friends of mine. I absolutely love this disc. As always, I'm Andrew Cavanaugh. Thank you for coming back to Cavanaugh's Corner. If you enjoyed this review, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more reviews like this.